Hi, 5th and 6th graders. Today in science we are talking about the Space Shuttle program. And so before I start, I just want to remind you of a few things. So last time we talked about the Apollo program. Remember, the Apollo missions all were going to the moon, or that was their goal, to go to the moon. And they used disposable spacecraft. Okay, so that's way different than the space shuttles. Disposable means that they couldn't use it again. They got rid of it after its launch, or after it came back down to Earth, excuse me. So the space shuttles, they wanted to be able to use them again because they thought, why waste the spacecraft after we've used it once? Why not come up with something where you can use it more than once in space? So that's what the space shuttles were for. The space shuttles started going in 1972, and they went up until 2011, so that was not that long ago, less than 10 years ago. And the space shuttles went into space 135 different times, okay? But there were only 5 different space shuttles, okay? So all of those 5 space shuttles flew over and over and over again, and so that's how they went into space 135 times. And over 350 different astronauts got to go into space with the space shuttle, so that was really cool. Okay, so like it says on the slide there, the space shuttle was the world's first reusable space vehicle, so that's what made it so unique. And the 5 names of the space shuttles are listed there. So we have the Columbia, the Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour. Okay, so this is just going into some history. So President Richard Nixon was the president who decided to kind of, start the space shuttle program. So he authorized NASA to come up with the money to do this. And the space shuttles, they were supposed to be able to hold 7 astronauts and then carry up to 50,000 pounds of cargo. Okay, and here is just some pictures, just a graphic with some pictures showing you how many missions each of the space shuttles went on. Okay, so we're going to talk about each one individually. So the Space Shuttle Columbia went on 28 different flights. There is a picture of it right there. The Space Shuttle Columbia was the first one to go off, and it came from Florida. They all launched from Florida, actually. There was actually one astronaut on the Columbia that was also an Apollo astronaut, so that was kind of cool. Okay, and this is something that is sad, and in space travel there's always a risk of bad things happening. So this is something that I actually remember happening. I was in, 6th grade, I think, when this happened, but the Columbia Space Shuttle actually exploded when it was coming back down to Earth. Okay, so because that happened, it couldn't come back down to Earth. Something happened that wasn't supposed to happen, obviously, and so all the 7 astronauts that were on that space shuttle passed away in that explosion. And that is a picture of all 7 of them. And you might recall, other astronauts in the Apollo missions also died too, like the astronauts of Apollo 1. So that's just something that astronauts, a risk that they know that they have to take. They know that something bad like that might happen. Okay, so the Challenger was another space shuttle. It first launched in 1982, and sadly, its last launch was 1986 because it also exploded. Something bad happened that wasn't supposed to happen. So there's a picture of it there. Actually, I'll go back to that. So if you see, there's this part that looks like an airplane. That is the actual space shuttle, okay? These boosters are what kind of launch it off into space, but those don't go with it the whole way, okay? So just this little airplane looking part is what goes into space. Okay, so here's just some history of the Challenger, okay? One cool thing that happened with the Challenger on one of the missions was that the first American woman went into space on the Challenger. Her name was Sally Ride, and also the first African American astronaut went into space on the Challenger. His name was Guy Bluford. Okay, but yes, in 1986, and this is before I was born, but you all might ask your parents and grandparents if they remember when this happened. So in 1986, the Challenger also broke apart and exploded. So, just some mistake happened that wasn't supposed to happen. And an interesting thing about this was that there was actually a school teacher on board the Challenger when that happened, because she was supposed to, I think she won a contest, I've heard. She won a contest to go into space. So, and that's a picture of the explosion. And that's the crew of the Challenger. Okay, and this memorial and the one that I showed you after the Columbia, those are at the space centers to commemorate those astronauts. Okay, so these next space shuttles that we're going to talk about, they did not explode. They always landed safely and everything went okay with their launches. So that's good. There's a picture of the Discovery, and here's just some brief history. So even some politicians flew with the Discovery, and a prince from Saudi Arabia. So that was some cool stuff that did. Okay, the Atlantis went on 32 flights. There's a picture of it. Okay, so they had some cool stuff with the Atlantis too. In fact, one spacecraft that was actually on its way to Jupiter was launched from the Atlantis space shuttle when it was in space. Okay, a space shuttle cannot go as far as Jupiter. I mean, no human has gone as far into space as the planet Jupiter, but that's something that the Atlantis did. Okay, and that was the last space shuttle in space also. Okay, and there was an IMAX movie that was made from this space shuttle as well, from pictures that it took. Okay, and the Endeavour was another space shuttle, flew on 25 flights. Okay, it was the first space shuttle that flew to the International Space Station, which is something that we're going to learn about next week. Okay, and you'll actually get to look at pictures of the International Space Station next week too. So another teacher got to go into space. So if you remember, I said on the Challenger there was a school teacher, but she ended up passing away when the Challenger exploded. So this school teacher got to go into space, and this mission where she was on the space shuttle was successful, so that was fine. So that was cool. Okay. And I always think that this is cool. So the Endeavour was actually named by kids. Okay, so NASA had like kind of a competition to name the space shuttle. And I guess I don't know how they picked the name, I don't know how they picked the best one, but they had a competition. That was in 1988. And so I heard that like thousands and thousands of kids entered name ideas, and they picked Endeavour. Okay, and this is a picture that it took from space. Okay, so this is what's important to know. So the Space Shuttle program kind of broke barriers in a lot of different ways. Okay, so at the beginning of NASA's history, it says this on here, being an astronaut was very exclusive, and that basically means it was hard to become an astronaut. Okay, so you had to be someone who was usually military trained, and astronauts were always white and they were always men. Okay, but the Space Shuttle program let so many more people become astronauts, so people that had other careers, men and women, and also just all different races of people too, so that was cool. It was also the first reusable spacecraft, like I said at the beginning, so that made it unique in that way too, because they could keep using the space shuttles over and over. Okay, so I hope that you have enjoyed learning about the space shuttles today, and next week you can look forward to seeing some pictures from the International Space Station. Right now, we're going to watch a live feed from it and learning about what the International Space Station does in space. All right, have a good day.